I mean, they're entirely affected by the Nakba, where both my parents, my dad was born in Palestine, in a tiny village in called Quikat, which is very close to Akka. And he was just a baby in 1948 when they were uprooted. And my mom was born actually in the refugee camp. So she's a bit younger than my dad. So she was born in Syria, in Homs, in a refugee camp. And my dad grew up in the refugee camp of Burj al Barajni in Lebanon. So, I mean, I just came back actually from a trip to Lebanon, and the family, my extended family is still there. My cousins, my aunts, uncles, and many members of my family are buried in the camp cemetery. So it was kind of a pilgrimage to go and visit my grandparents. And it's funny because it's such a beautiful cemetery in the middle of the camp, which is, architecturally, it's but the cemetery itself is absolutely beautiful, planted with olive trees and all sorts of things. And it's just the most beautiful and the saddest place I've ever seen. So yeah, my whole family history. I mean, I was born in Dubai. I'm a second generation refugee. I was born a refugee. And of course, we've had, until we came to Canada, we had to live in various different countries. And as Palestinians from Lebanon, we also had to deal with the civil war. So at one point, I have many family members who also died in the civil war in Lebanon. So yeah, it's basically my whole life. Saffouryeh, yeah, it's a story. I don't know if I actually tell it in the short story, but I was when I was young and we were studying in a book, a history book, when I was in Dubai in Arabic, and the history book mentioned the revolutionaries against the British colonials, against British colonialism, and they cited three figures who were quite consequential in the fight against the British. And I was reading it with my mom, and my mom just she's like, "But that's my uncle."
Yeah.
So, so she said, "I said what?" She said, "Yeah, that's your great uncle." And then she told me the story about Saffouryeh being really the center for resistance against the British and the role that my uncle played in it with the other members of the brigades, of Azzeddin al-Qassam brigades. And so I thought it was important because people don't know the history. People have no idea that Palestinians have been fighting for their freedom for now almost 100 years. And that this not only precedes the 7th of October, it precedes 1967, it precedes 1948. We've always been fighting and against all these powers. And every single time, it seems you can read it in two ways. You can read it as every single time we've tried and we failed, or you can read it, which is the way I like to read it, is that against the most powerful empire in the world, who've tried again and again and again to erase us, we're still here. So, and I think the story of Safuri is also very interesting because it's really uh, lots of stories superposed, superimposed on each other. Because before that, it used to be a center for the Crusaders, and before that, it was the center, the commercial center. It was a metropolis in Romanian times, and my grandmother would tell me how they used to play in the fields and they would see the mosaics under their feet, you know? And also because of the interreligious relationships, my grandmother spoke Italian because there was a convent right at the edge of the city, and they were Italian. It was an Italian congregation, and the young girls, the young Palestinian girls from the village, would go there to help the sisters. And so my grandmother spoke Italian because of that. So it's all of these, for me, it just embodies what Palestine is, you know, it's all of this plurality, all of this, in French we would call couche, textures of history, one on the other over the other. And it seems like when you came up with, and asked me to write, it's the first thing that came up to mind, you know. I would have liked to write about Quikat because also Quikat, my father's village, also produced some interesting folklore history. The famous song Jafra actually comes from a girl from the village. You know, it's a love song for a girl from my dad's village. So I think we all have stories like that, and but it seems so for you. It just it grows in the imagination. It was perfect for this subject. Yeah. It's interesting because when you write from Canada, you also write from the perspective of the indigenous peoples here. And ever since the genocide started, there's been so much solidarity from the indigenous peoples here in Canada. It's just been amazing, and so many relationships, links where, people immediately made the links. People saw the mechanisms. It is exactly the same thing, same thing that's been happening to Palestinians for over 100 years. They've been through it for 500 years, and they're still fighting. So when I write with that consciousness. Before I came to Canada, I didn't really have the consciousness of being the awareness of being an indigenous peoples, and it's by coming to Canada, and especially as an editor, and I've worked with indigenous writers, and it's by working with them that I made all these links in the end. It's not exactly the same story, but the mechanisms of erasure are the same, and the let's just say the villains are the same.
Mhm.
The French and the British. So yeah, so I write a lot from that perspective. And the way I think what I like about this book is that it helps us. One way to, get away from the colonial frame is to go through fiction and imagine what hasn't been imagined before. When I write, I always try to, instead of being in reactive mode or oppositional mode, I try to find detours. I try to like forge a path like on the side. And when you forge a path on the side, then you're the one who decides what the direction is and what the perspective is and where the horizon lies. And I think this is what I really liked about the idea of this book is taking this history and even turning the horror of this history into something that you can recreate and reappropriate in a way. So and I think one of the reasons why uh, 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 fiction and I don't want to say this dystopic because I have a problem with this with linking Palestine to dystopia. Because I think we are resolutely optimistic and people filled with hope, and I think this is what makes it very hard for them to make us disappear.
Mhm.
So I wanted in the book to give a chance to the village to take its revenge in a way,
Mhm.
and at the same time I wanted that the forest also to redeem itself, this
Yeah.
forest of pines that was planted to cover up the village. Actually, there are archival images of Saffouryeh before and after the erasure, where you can clearly see how the pine forest was built. I mean, was planted literally in 24 hours. They got all these tiny, tiny, tiny pines, and they just, planted them in 24 hours. And you can see that it's all square and very geometrical and very symmetrical, and uh, so you see the artificiality of it. So yeah, I wanted to give even the forest its say because I don't think it chose to be part of that crime. I think I believe that fiction is total freedom. I mean, when I'm in front of a page or a screen, um, I'm completely free, and I can make up whatever I need to make up, and I don't need to follow anybody's rules. I can decide to change the dates of history. I can decide to change the consequences of history. I can decide to rewrite history. Um, and I think sometimes, as Palestinians, there is always this tension between telling our story, saying what really happened, because it's been, they've tried so hard to make it disappear, but also not to be a prisoner of that same history, you know? So I think fiction is a way to get away from that conundrum, where you can start from something that's real, and then you can build it into something that's possible. And I think this is the challenge for Palestinians. It's to open up possibilities, not just to be confronted with fate. So yeah, so this is what I try to do when I write. Just before 7th October happened, I was just finishing my fourth novel, and I had imagined a utopia in Palestine. Uh, and then when the 7th of October happened, and when I saw the reaction of the world basically giving the green light to just kill us all, it's like fair game, just kill them all. And with such moral superiority and such, I was so disgusted. And so, like, I was just really traumatized. I think I was even more traumatized by the reaction of the world than from, it's just, I couldn't believe it. Somebody said, a friend of mine said, it's like we had no idea uh, how dehumanized we were until we saw how people reacted, you know? And so I almost basically threw my novel away. I was like, this makes no sense. I can't write a utopia in this horrible, horrible world. And thankfully my publisher insisted, and he said, well, this is how you imagined, and don't let the world dictate to you what your vision of Palestine is. And I had imagined that Palestine was the only place in the world worth living. And he said, don't let them take this away from you. And so I stuck with it, even though I was really unsure. Um, and one of the reasons I stuck with it was Rifat al-Gharair's poem. When I read it about building a kite, and I had a dream actually of Rifat al-Gharair just repeating the word to me, telling me, this novel is a kite. This novel is a kite. This is your kite. And so I woke up, and I was like, okay, this is my kite. And that really helped, because then in the beginning, of course, like many Palestinian writers, for the first, it's my first novel, and I have, like the standard press for my novels, and for this novel, like nobody was calling, and I was being canceled like everybody else. And but then people started reading the novel, and many Palestinians came to me and told me that how important it was for them at the time of despair to be able to imagine a future.
Mhm.
So that really helped. And then here in Montreal, we had one of the biggest student encampments in the world. And my children were involved in the encampment, and very involved, and I was so proud of them. And the whole community came around the encampment. And honestly, I put my energy in that, and that also helped a lot. But mostly reading other Palestinians, reading Palestinian poetry. Not that I did not despair at points. Like many Palestinians, I had nightmares. Sometimes I look at images of myself from 2023, and I realize that I had lost a lot of weight. It's just probably not eating, and it's just It's horrible, and even today, it's very hard to deal with. But you try. One of the ways I try to do it is just like you, by involving myself in projects where you build things around Palestinian consciousness and awareness and imagination and editing other Palestinians and just making sure our voice is heard, our presence is there. For me, this is the fight I've tried to like keep our voices there and present. They want us to disappear, and so you make sure you occupy every single space in every single way. Um, and so yeah, so one of this project is part of it, and it makes me feel useful. I mean, he really literally saved. I think he saved me at that point, with his voice and with that poem. Um, Yeah, so you see, they killed him, but in the end, he's larger than life, and he's more present than ever. I always had a land that produces so many beautiful poets. You can never kill it, you know? So we're here. We're not going anywhere.